Last summer, I almost drowned while swimming off the coast of Australia. Now, I'm not a strong swimmer, not even close, but I let myself drift farther and farther out, too caught up in the moment and the beauty to realize the danger. The water out there was warm, the sun was high, and I was chasing that weightless feeling you get when you float on the surface. The kind of feeling that makes you feel small in the best sort of way. But then the ocean turned on me. The bottom of the sea disappeared beneath my feet, and suddenly I was in over my head. The waves weren't playful anymore. They were relentless, overpowering, pulling me deeper and tossing me like I was nothing. Every time I fought my way up for air, another wave crashed over me, forcing me back under. That current yanked me further from the shore, dragging me out with terrifying strength. That was the moment that I knew I was drowning, and I was going to die. For a split second, I was terrified. The instinct to survive kicked in. I flailed, kicked, tried to push myself back toward the shore, but the more I struggled, the more the ocean fought back, pulling me under, filling my mouth and lungs with salt water. And then that fear vanished. Just like that, all panic melted away, replaced by something that I never expected to feel. Calm. A stillness had settled over me, as if my body had already made peace with what was happening before my mind could catch up. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. I stopped struggling, stopped clawing at the water. The ocean was no longer my enemy. It was cradling me, and I surrendered to it, letting it take me where it wanted. I just accepted it. This is how I'm going to die. And somehow that acceptance felt beautiful. When suddenly, hands, grabbing me, yanking me back toward reality. I felt a strong grip on my bathing suit, tugging me upward, forcing me back into a world that I had already made peace with leaving. No, I didn't want to be saved. I had already let go. Why was someone dragging me back? I thrashed, pushing away, fighting him off with what little strength I had left. Every fiber of my body rejected the idea of survival. I was supposed to die here, wasn't I? I had already come to grips with that. Why wouldn't he just let me go? I kicked against him, shoved against his chest, tried to break free from his grip, but he wouldn't stop. He was fighting me, while also fighting for me. And then through the chaos of it all, I saw it. My boyfriend's face, filled with pure and unfiltered terror. I had never seen that look before, that mix of desperation and agony, fear and determination. He was struggling. He was drowning too. Not because of the waves, not because of the current, because of me. Because I was fighting him, dragging him down with me. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't care about saving myself, but I didn't want him to die. So I stopped. I let my body go limp in his arms, let him pull me towards safety, let him fight for me when I refused to fight for myself. I let him win. By the time we reached the shore, I was completely drained, both physically and emotionally. And I'm sure the same could be said about him. He collapsed next to me on the sand, chest heaving, arms shaking, eyes still wide with that lingering panic. He looked at me, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't, because what could I say? Thank you? I wasn't grateful. I was angry. Because the truth is, in those few moments underwater, in that peaceful abyss, I felt something I had never felt before in my 40 years of living. True peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from comfort or happiness, the kind that comes from letting go completely. And now, that moment was ripped away from me. I struggle because I should be grateful, right? He saved my life. But I don't feel grateful. I feel resentful. Because for one brief moment, I was free. No stress, no anxiety, no worries, just complete surrender. But now I'm back. Back to bills and responsibilities, back to expectations and obligations, back to a life that never gave me the same sense of peace that dying did. I don't say any of this out loud. I don't tell him how I feel because how could I? How could I look this man in the eye and say, I wish you hadn't saved me? I forced myself to have a miscarriage behind my husband's back. You might have found yourself on this story thinking that this was some sob case about not being able to afford an abortion. Maybe something like I had to escape an abusive relationship. But this isn't that. So you were warned, and I don't give a fuck about what the comments have to say. I'm 27, and I've been with my husband since I was 23. I've known since I was 18 that I didn't want children. I like kids, they're just not for me. I'm too selfish, too independent, and I like my quiet far too much. I've always told my husband that. I don't want kids. I'd never want them. And if he wanted a child, that we shouldn't be together. He's a criminal attorney and loves his job. He didn't want kids either. Always maintained that, so together we were happy. I'm on the pill, and half the time he pulls out, but shit happens, and I ended up getting pregnant about 3 months ago now. Looking down at that positive test that I took as a half-assed joke, felt like a fucking death sentence staring back at me. I ran out to tell my husband. It's something he should know. But what did he do? A man who deals with horrific criminal cases, a man that never sheds a tear, started crying. He started crying because he was so happy. I was disgusted, and he was happy. He was hugging me, kissing me, when I told him that I thought he didn't want kids. He said, up until this very moment, he hadn't. But now knowing that a child was coming, it's all that he wants. I couldn't tell him that this was terrible. How was I meant to tell him that I wanted it out, gone, forgotten? I tried to come to terms with it. I love him more than anyone else in the world, so I figured that I'd wait for that maternal feeling to overwhelm me. But when he was talking about names and gender, I thought I was going to scream. It all felt like a betrayal. He promised me that he didn't want kids. He made me think that I didn't have to give him a baby. And I realized that a child is not something you have to make someone else happy. They deserve love and attention, and I didn't want to give it any. I couldn't go to the doctors. He'd find out about it. He's a fucking lawyer, and he can smell bullshit from 10 million miles away. He also knows all the right people. He knows the doctor that I'd go to, and while I know about patient confidentiality, I just know that he'd know. It was something that I could feel in my bones. In addition to that, I know that I'd come back from any procedure all sick and sore, likely unable to walk, and he'd notice. He's just too smart for that. So I Googled how to miscarry. I drank all the teas, ate the bad things, and did all the exercises, while making sure to drink alcohol when he wasn't around. I also took medicine that I wasn't meant to. It had been a month, and he was wanting to go to the doctors, and I knew I couldn't. I knew they'd figure out what I was up to, so I pushed the appointments back, ordered pills online. I took them, destroyed the evidence, and the next thing I know, it's 1 a.m. one night, and I wake up to find myself bleeding. Most people in this situation would wake up panicked. Me? I woke up relieved. I got up, threw my underwear in the trash bin, put on some period underwear, and took one of the pills that my husband uses to help sleep, and I just slept through it. I woke up the next morning around the same time as him, and I looked down and feigned disaster. I pretended to sob, cry, be distraught, and he held me through it just fine. He insisted that I go to a doctor, but I knew that I couldn't with everything in my system, so I simply acted too upset to do so. I have a friend that's a doctor, so about a week later, I had her check me out off the books. I'm fine. Everything turned out okay because I didn't hurt myself. I knew the risks, okay? But even a trapped animal will gnaw off its own leg in order to escape a predicament. I told my husband unequivocally that I couldn't fathom kids anymore because I was so traumatized from this experience. He agreed and just left it be. I'm taking birth control much more seriously now, and that's all he needs to know. I'd be all too happy to never have to confess to him all that I went through to keep from having this child. Paint me however you'd like in your own head. That's fine. That's fair. But you're not living my life for me. I know that I wouldn't be capable of being a loving and doting mother, and that's what any child deserves. I sleep well at night knowing that I won't bring a life into this world that I can't fully care for. One has to do what's best for them, and I know that I did just that. This is pretty hard for me to post. I've never talked to anyone about this. Even my wife doesn't know the full extent of it. But here we go. In the year 2000, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. She was a 2-pack-a-day smoker for about 25 years. She fought hard, though, and was able to extend the short life expectancy the doctors gave her. I'm not exactly sure how long they initially gave her. I was only 10 at the time, and they spared me the details. Anyway, she survived for over a year and ended up passing away in February of 2001. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Her best friend came over the very next day as we were in mourning to pay respects and say goodbye to her friend, which is normal and fine. The thing I felt weird about was that same night, the day after my mother's passing, her best friend spent the night with me and my dad. She slept on the couch. At the time, it didn't give me too much pause. I had other things on my mind, obviously. Plus, we had numerous family and friends coming by and sleeping over before her passing as well, so it was something that I grew semi-used to. Time goes by, and it seems every other night she's sleeping over. Within the first month of my mother's death, she's finally sleeping in my dad's room with him. I didn't like it, but at least during this time she was nice about it, even borderline respectful. She brought her 2 youngest kids a lot as well, which was nice at the time. But fast forward 3 months, we ended up moving, and she and her 2 kids ended up coming with us. By this time, my father and her are already talking about marriage, something that I strongly protest, along with every single family member of mine. But they decide to ignore me and everyone else, and they get married. The same year my mother passed away nonetheless. At first, things were the same as they were, but as time went on, she began to show favoritism towards her own kids, which I guess is understandable. But to the extent that it grew, that was kind of disturbing. She'd let her kids get away with murder. They would taunt me, make fun of my dead mom. They'd throw ashtrays at me, yelling, "Your mom wants a hug." She was cremated, so pretty much anything with ash was fair game to use to fuck with me. A year goes by in this new living arrangement, and me being a skater kid, I frequented the skate park a lot. On my way back home one day, I aged bad. Hit a crack in the road on a very steep and large hill. I was probably going 20 miles per hour. The board stopped, but my body didn't. After the crash, I rolled a few more feet. I was barely able to move, but I managed to hobble back home, cradling my arm like a baby and screaming at the top of my lungs the entire way. As I'm walking up, she intercepts me in the garage and accuses me of overreacting and tells me to, quote, "Stop being a little pussy." I knew there was something wrong with my arm, considering I was physically unable to move it. But she wouldn't listen to me, and my dad wouldn't be home from work for hours. So I waited for him to show up, and when he does, it's apparent that my stepmom had already spoken to him, so he wasn't going to listen to me either. The next day was a school day. I remember this because I was awoken by my stepmom's little cretin of a son throwing my full backpack onto my chest to wake me up. I woke up screaming. Stepmom comes running into the room and promptly tells me to shut the fuck up, that I'm not hurt, and that I need to stop faking because I'm still going to school. but I couldn't stop. I was in agony. I was still cradling my arm, so she punched my bicep, sort of in the fashion that friends would, I guess you could say. She then said, "I'm taking your dumbass to the hospital, just to make you feel stupid when they tell you nothing's wrong." Well, upon seeing the doctor, he almost immediately says, "Yep, you're broken. I can tell by the way you're supporting your arm." Stepmom was silent. Doctor sets up x-rays. Turns out my collarbone was completely shattered. Proved her ass wrong, but it only seemed to fuel her rage even more. She became spiteful. She took away all my skateboards, bikes, pretty much anything that I could ride. My arm was in a sling anyway, so it wasn't like I could use them. But she had no intent on giving them back. In fact, she gave them to her own son. The kicker was that even my own dad said it was for the best because I've shown to be irresponsible with them, and I couldn't use them properly. Only thing I was able to do back then was play video games. Barely, considering just how bundled my arm was. Another few months go by, and my arm is healing up well. So we all head out for an easy hike in the desert. We find and pick some wild cactus apples. Excited and eager, I start eating one with the help of my dad. Turns out, there were little mites in the fruit, and I contracted scabies. Half of my face swells up in the most morbid of ways. I couldn't talk right, couldn't open one of my eyes. I was seriously fucked. My older sister, that I just realized I haven't mentioned at all yet, came to visit me with my 2 nephews. They drove 3 long hours just to hang out with me and to see how I'm doing. As soon as she sees my gruesome, swollen face, she screams in terror, grabs up her kids, and leaves. Needless to say, this made me feel even more like shit. But I understood it. She calls my dad, urging him to take me to the hospital, but stepmom again refuses, saying it's not that bad and that all I need is a nice warm washcloth. Well, 2 weeks go by. Swelling has gone down, but it's not completely gone. Sister then threatens to call the cops if they don't do something. So stepmom again tries saying she's gonna feel dumb when it turns out to be nothing. Well, by now, doctors say that they can't tell what it is. Scabies was the most likely diagnosis, considering the symptoms, but that I should have been there 2 weeks prior when I couldn't open my eye. Somehow, stepmom takes this as a win. More time goes by. More shit happens between me and stepmom. CPS is called, and I get interviewed. Nothing happens with that, though. The holidays were ruined by our kids, yet I was to blame. I ended up basically being Cinderella in my own house at this point. My bed was even moved into the laundry room. Eventually, around the time that I was 14, I worked up the courage to tell my dad what I really thought about her, and how she treats me. But by this time, he was so tainted by her that he began speaking like her. He said to get over it, she's not mean, and that I was just trying to antagonize for the sake of drama. I told him if that's how he feels, then I'm moving out to live with my sister. Sister agrees and I move out, and life was good for a bit, till I started missing my dad. I felt like I had failed him, so after 2 years of living with my sister, I decided to move back in with Pops. Almost on arrival though, stepmom starts her shit all over again. Comments like, "Great, more unneeded doctor visits," or "No skateboarding, don't want your sister calling CPS again." Here's a note, it was actually my aunt that called. I found that out years later. On the day before my 17th birthday, I'll never forget the words that came out of her mouth. I was getting breakfast and made a comment on how the house was starting to reek of cigarette smoke. I'll admit that at this point, I was a bit snarky, but I had said it to myself and stepmom wasn't in the room. But she heard me. She storms in and tells me, if you don't like it, go back to your sister's house. Or did she kick your whiny ass out and that's why you're back? I snapped. I told her to fuck off and to unalive herself. She walked right up to me and looked down at me. This woman's a good foot taller than I am. And says, "You do it. I fucking dare you." I stare at her in disbelief and she starts laughing. "Fucking pussy. You're weak. Just like your mom." At this point, I have a death grip on my fork, with every intention of sticking it right into her throat. But I don't. I keep quiet and continue eating. That was the first of many comments about my mom. Seems like she took a page right out of her kid's playbook. Only thing is, she was supposedly my mom's best friend. I call her out on it, and she tells me to fuck off and die. Because of the years of mental abuse, I become depressed. The thought of taking my own life was on my mind a lot, and that's something she knew. She egged me on, telling me to say hi to my mom in hell when I get there. She would get drunk and say the most horrible things like, "I hope Satan makes your mom put cigarette butts out on your face for eternity." After a while of this, I made a noose, measured the rope, and tied it to a wooden beam on my ceiling. One night, I went through with it, but the wooden beam broke, and I obviously survived. I took this as a sign that maybe I'm not the one that needs to die. Eventually, I end up finding my dad's gun after a few days of snooping in his room when no one was home. I hid it in my room and kept telling myself on repeat, next time she's blind drunk. Well, a friend came over one night, and we began talking a bit. I told him I was fed up and that I had a plan. I didn't go into details, but he's a smart guy. He was able to figure out what I was planning pretty easily. He began crying to me. He pleaded with me not to go through with anything and to move back into my sister's house. This went on for quite a while, but eventually he talked me out of it. I showed him the gun that I had hidden, and he snatched it out of my hands before taking off out of my house and running down the road towards the lake. I gave chase, but I didn't get to him before he reached the water's edge. He tossed that thing as hard and as far as he could into the water, and somehow seeing that made me feel better. I realized that this account is pretty anticlimactic, but shortly after the lake thing, I just ended up moving back in with my sister. From that point on, no one in my family has had contact with my dad or his wife. I think that's his choice though. It's now been over 10 years, and I've moved across the country to numerous different states. I've made a career and a name for myself. I got married to my dream girl, and we have the best little girl together. Things simply couldn't be better for me. Last I heard, stepmom's two youngest are in rehab centers, and stepmom herself had a massive heart attack that almost killed her. I'm actually a little surprised that she even has a heart. Anyway, that's my life, laid out in all its poorly written glory. I'm sure some people won't buy this, but honestly, I didn't put it here for anyone else other than myself, so it's no skin off my back. Take what you want from this whole thing. I'm just glad to get it off my chest one way or another. And I'm grateful that I had an amazing friend that was able to pull me out of one of the darkest pits of my life.